Welcome to the Delmarva Almanac. Each week we connect you to the best of Delmarva. I'm your host, Dana Kester McCabe. Jan Crumpley and Taylor Collins have channeled their love of art and history into their paintings and the Parke Green Galleries on State Street by the Green in Dover. Because Jan and Taylor's gallery is in a building of historical significance, they have fully embraced a heritage theme with a particular emphasis on women's contributions to our history. So while I was there to ask them about their artwork, they also explained their heritage work. One of the rooms in their gallery is named for famed astronomer and Dover native Annie Jump Cannon. Another is named for one of the first state's great preservationists.
So we named that room the Mabel Lloyd Ridgely room because that is Mabel Lloyd Ridgely. It is the Ridgely house next door. That was her house, and the family history goes way back. But she's the woman that we really like in that era. She started Old Dover Days, and she saved the old State House because they were going to tear it down when they built the new Leg Hall. So she saved that, and she was real big in preservation. She was a suffragette and all that, and which were all the women that lived on the Green were at that time.
Mabel Lloyd Ridgely was also an artist.
Oh yeah.
And so the other thing about Mabel too is that in 1926 she and her husband Henry bought this building. And they reconfigured the Capitol Hotel to be they changed the aspect of it, making it these offices that you see from some of the remaining interior hotel walls. And their family has continuously lived in the Ridgely house next door since 1767, but the family is still there and they're our landlords, and so we pay homage to them that way too.
Jan and Taylor often find themselves telling shop visitors the stories of this unique neighborhood. There are quite a few they could tell, but the one they are asked to repeat the most is the story of the chocolate murders. I had never heard this story, so Jan Crumpley filled me in.
What happened was there was two daughters that lived here on the Green of John Pennington, who was a state legislator and a lawyer. The youngest of the two married this man, John Dunning, and he was an AP writer. And so he became head of the AP post in San Francisco State. So he took his bride, Mary Elizabeth, and they went out to San Francisco. They had a child while they were there, but he was basically a philanderer. And this woman that he was seeing grew more and more important to him, and so Mary Elizabeth figured this all out at some point and cut her losses and came back home with the baby to live with her parents here on the Green. And then some time ensued, and John Dunning ran afoul of the AP, and they said, well, you're not going to run our bureau anymore. We're going to send you to cover the Spanish-American War. You're off to Puerto Rico. So, but I guess he didn't tell his mistress, and her name was Cordelia Botkin. And Cordelia Botkin had a lot of plans up her sleeve, and basically she figured that John Dunning had come back to Dover to reunite with his wife, and if she couldn't have him, nobody would. So, believe it or not, she made arsenic chocolates and was able to mail it in the heat of summer via trains. There weren't planes back then taking the mail to Dover, Delaware. These chocolates were delivered anonymously, and the two sisters ate them and both died. And then there had been other, right, and some children got sick, and a bunny died too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when Mary Elizabeth died, they called John Dunning back to come and bury his wife, and John Pennington, the father, said she had received these anonymous letters, and what do you know? What do you think about this, and how do you think this came about? And the first thing that John Dunning, the philandering husband, said was, Cordelia.
This is the Delmarva Almanac. I'm Dana Kester McCabe, and this is the story of the chocolate murders. Naturally, after hearing Jan's story, I had to go find out more. The philandering husband, John Dunning, had made a name for himself covering the devastation of war and natural disaster in Samoa in the South Pacific. Following that harrowing experience, he brought his family to the West Coast to work for the Associated Press. But he and his wife, poor genteel Mary Elizabeth Dunning, were no match for the temptations found in San Francisco, and particularly Cordelia Bodkin. After meeting her while riding his bicycle to his office, John was hopelessly drawn into her dissolute world and a circle of wild women. When you hear the names of the players and just a few of the details, you can understand why large crowds gathered to attend the trial and why newspapers across the country made a fortune covering all the dirt. There was Cordelia Bodkin herself and her confidant, Mrs. Forcade. Another gal pal was Mrs. Seeley, Cordelia's stepson's girlfriend. And then there was Mrs. Arbogast, who was having an affair with Cordelia's husband. Yes, she too was married. Despite refusing to divorce Mr. Bodkin, Mrs. Arbogast had Cordelia's blessing in this union. Though they were never charged, there were accusations that one or more of Cordelia's friends were part of the murder conspiracy. She claimed it was they who had written anonymous notes to Mary Elizabeth Dunning, exposing her husband's wild life of gambling, drinking, and infidelity. Maybe they were the ones who sent the poison candy to Dover. While this may have been the first case of murder by mail in the U.S., Cordelia could have been inspired by a similar incident in Britain where she was raised. The American case was a particular problem for authorities because they couldn't decide whether the crime had been committed in Delaware, where 2 women died, or in California, where the poison candy was prepared. Finally, it was decided that the trial should take place in San Francisco. The prosecution presented pretty compelling evidence that Cordelia had purchased the poison, but her case was lost when a writer for the San Francisco Examiner named Mrs. Get this, Lizzie Livernash was assigned to befriend Cordelia and investigate the case. Despite knowing the woman was a newspaper reporter, Cordelia took her into her confidence. Though she never confessed to the murder plot, she shared lurid details of her escapades with John Dunning and how she was dedicated to a life of pleasure. Mrs. Livernash, in turn, repeated all this in court. The stories of Cordelia and her friends' outrageous behavior were enough to convince the jury. Cordelia was convicted despite maintaining her innocence. It's not clear where her money came from, but she hired the top defense attorneys in the city, who mounted several appeals. They got her a retrial, but she was convicted again and sentenced to life in prison. John Dunning's responsibility for setting off the terrible chain of events took its toll on him as well. He had to admit in court that he had lost all of his money gambling, and that he had dalliances with several other women. He was then jailed during the proceedings for refusing to name them. His writing career was ruined, and not long after the trials, he died of a brain tumor at the age of 44. Meanwhile, Cordelia charmed the guards at the San Francisco jail where she was incarcerated. They allowed her to have extravagant privileges. Nice bed linens, good food, and believe it or not, the freedom to come and go from the jail grounds. The very judge who had sentenced her was shocked when he ran into her on a public trolley while she was out for an afternoon ride. This special treatment apparently went on until the earthquake of 1906 wrecked the jail, forcing her and other convicts there to be transferred to the much bleaker existence of San Quentin. This is where she died in 1910, some say of depression. Not all the stories about the stately homes and respected families that have lived on the Green in Dover are so lurid. There are many equally fascinating tales of important turning points in the history of our country which happened right there. Monday through Saturday all year long, storytellers at the John Bell House on the Green give free guided walks through Dover's historic district. To find out more about these and the Dover Days Festival, visit this story on our website, delmarvaalmanac.com/history. Well, that's all for this edition of the Delmarva Almanac. Be sure to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and next week join us to learn more about our local culture and get connected to our natural wonders. If you'd like to become an underwriter for this program, visit delmarvaalmanac.com/support. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore, and underwriters eatdrinkbuyart.com for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.